Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. Welcome to the stream, Magic Monsters. I'll tell you what, I'm using Restream now to do this stream. And I don't know if you can hear the music in the background. Can you hear the music in the background? I have no idea. I don't know. Usually I use OBS and I've got my usual setup, but on OBS I can't easily invite others to join, but here on Restream I can. So I'm using Restream now, seeing how that goes. We've got all the fun stuff like I can do this. Check out my stuff on the asset store. Isn't that nice? I think that's nice. But what I don't like is that my window, it doesn't have the option to only show a full screen. I have to show the full wide screen, the ultra wide screen, which doesn't make any sense because I want to be able to flip back and forth between windows. I want to be able to show Unity, Rider, and ChatGPT and other things on the browser. So it's kind of annoying. Yeah, curious what you all think. Let's see. I can do that, so it's a little wider, but again, it's just not the best, but that's okay. All right, so nobody else has joined me just yet, and I don't know if anyone will. So I'm on my project here, and I think the last time I stopped, there was a weird bug where this UFO was being attacked from really far away. But I'll go ahead and show what we got going on here. So that means you can't hear the AI voice talking, huh? That's a shame. It's interesting that these are turning on right now because they're not moving until I start the wave. So I wonder if they're all going to move at once. Let's find out. Start wave. We do this, and it does appear. No, they didn't move all at once. So this is the UFO. This is the new UFO character that I created. And last time, this flamethrower, which apparently is no longer. I got null reference exceptions. I don't know what's going on there. So that's more issues. So we're going to start. I'm just going to start doing this stuff. I don't know why I have a null reference exception. I shouldn't. Enemy in range, get component. We don't have the component, or we don't have a damage condition. Well, this should have a damage condition. I didn't change that. Sure enough, on fire. And the UFO has an actor. So what is unnull referencing here? Okay, debug.log. Log. Enemy is null. True debug.log. Let's see. Enemy component is null. We'll say component is null. Equals null. And what else can be? Actor would be the other one, and damage condition. So debug.log. Actor is null. And debug.log, whoops, not that, debug.log, damage condition is, oh, there you go. Okay, let's find out. Hello, Aaron. Oh, I see. Noah wants to say hello. That's true. All right, let's see if we can, exit prefab mode. Start wave. I don't think that happened. Oh, I should probably attack. Where's the UFO? Wasn't there a UFO that came out super early last time? So now the things are working. Let's see what happens when we check the UFO. All right, there we go. Component is null. Does the UFO not have an enemy component on it? It certainly does. Why wouldn't it have an enemy component on it? Let's see. If we go to our overrides, no overrides. our UFO is going to just have a UFO. I was doing this last night. All right, so this is our wave group. This wave group is going to have one UFO. All these nice little readouts here so you can get a sense of how tough the group is. And then we go to my waves right here. We're going to go create a new wave called UFO test. And the UFO test is missing its, oh, interesting. Okay, we gotta fix something here. I think what's going on here is that, where is my, we're going to go wave editor, actually, wave editor. On the wave editor, I think it's because these are all doing stuff and there's nothing in the list, so it's throwing that error or something. So let's go to our draw, and we're going to say, where's it drawing all that stuff at the top then? Right here. No. I don't know what's going on. Why is it throwing an issue here? Header, wave editor. Oh, I see. All right, so we're going to say, yes, we want this. Yes, we want that. Yes, we want that. And then here, if wave groups, I call it. Wave group settings. Yeah. If wave group settings count equals 0, we will just return. So we won't show these little readouts if there's none. All right. Let's just try this again now from the start. Create game modules, tower defense, wave, UFO test. Good. All right, that seems to be working now. And then we'll add a UFO here. So now this group will just have that. If we go down to our spawner, we need to update the spawner here because add some more options, I think. Or not the spawner, I think it's the wave. This, I want to add more options here. But yeah. All right, so now only that UFO will spawn, in theory. It's a real shame you can't hear the audio. I guess I could do this. It won't be the same, though.
Never seen this kind of thing before, but it is clear from my algorithm processing power that they are dangerous.
All right, let's look at this. UFO. It's got an enemy on it, so why would it not be finding the enemy? Component is null. Okay, so it's not the end. Yeah, it's enemy.get component enemy. Oh. Enemies in range is a new list of enemy. So there is no need to get an enemy. So you know what I think happened? Wait a minute. Wait a minute. This is an AI issue. Hello, Story. No, you can join in and we can talk about anything you want. I honestly, this morning, I didn't sleep much last night, so I'm like a little tired. And I was like, should I go back to bed? And the dog that I'm taking care of was not having it this morning. And so we're up and now I'm here and now I am free to shoot the shit. I took the day off work. So that's that. So yeah, feel free to join. There's plenty we could talk about. AI was talking to a neighbor of mine. She's a voice actor. She's going to be going down to LA to strike. We talked briefly about AI while the dogs chase each other on leashes. AI. But this is an AI issue because AI wrote this code. AI wrote the code, and I didn't notice the issue that we have our enemies collider, and then enemies in range. Here we go. Welcome to the stream, Jason.
Howdy.
How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad. I just finished work right there. Right at that very minute, I was like, okay, done for the day. Did my duty. So
Nice. Let's see. Oh, okay, I can do that. Did your duty. So is my brother's dog this morning.
probably about the same color too. Yeah, so it's good. It's good so far. How's your tower defense thing coming along?
It's coming along. The work week always slows me down, right? Part of the reason I took the day off today was just because I wanted to get more stuff done. It doesn't having this dog here hasn't helped. I like dogs, but it's pretty clear that as much as I've always said I'd like to have a dog one day, I'm not ready for a dog. It's the going out for the walks and then having to play because the dog's asleep right now. It sleeps all day long, like all day long and all night long, which is remarkable. And then come around 5 o'clock, right when I'm ready to just get going on my own stuff that I really want to do, it just wants to play. It wants to play all night. So
okay, yeah, and that's where they lose me. Like I honestly, when I woke up this morning, it was first time in a very long time. You know when your bed just is like 40% more comfortable than usual. I was just like, this is going to be a real struggle. I could just stay here today. I did not feel like getting out of bed, and yeah.
Yep. Usually, I have to say this dog. So my brother keeps him in a crate. He does that thing, but the dog hates the crate. Like he refuses to go in every night. So I'm like, I don't want to like force him. But my brother says just shove him in, and I'm like, that doesn't feel right to me. So the first night he went in willingly. I think he didn't realize what was about to happen. And so the second night he just plopped himself and made himself loose, and was like, nope, it's gonna be hard for you. And so I said, fine, and I let him sleep on the bed. I've got a big bed, so the dog was super happy. And now every night I say, time to go to bed. And he gets so excited and he jumps on the bed as excited as a dog can be and then lays down and goes to sleep. Just like that. Like he gets it. And then he sleeps all night. And then in the morning, he's been just staying asleep until I get up, which is also great. Except this morning, he did not. This morning, he was in my face. So at like 7:15 in the morning. I think because I went to bed early last night, and so he was like, "We've been asleep for long enough."
Yeah, you messed up his circadian rhythms. He's not happy, you know.
Yeah, exactly. So what's going on with you? How's your world with game dev these days?
Yeah, it's good. I'm just doing some sentient AI little creatures. So just working on the censoring system there, so they're now sort of aware of their surroundings. I added a boredom. Literally, the last thing I just added was a boredom thing. So they look at stuff. If stuff doesn't do anything interesting for a few seconds, it'll be like, I'm bored now. It looks away, and then wait for something else interesting to happen, and then sort of potters around and keeps track of things that are interesting nearby, and makes assessments about what's changed or now interesting again, and so.
So this is the beginning of the singularity. It sounds like, because an AI that's bored sounds dangerous. If with enough capabilities, a bored AI seems extremely dangerous.
Well, so far it is fun. It is it's I think I mentioned before. It's basically sentient plants, and so for a while now it's been very systemic. There's just been like little pieces that do stuff. But today is the first time we put three of them together. Like one's got tentacle and one's like an eyeball. There's various different stuff, and we kind of had a bit of a Three Stooges thing going on. Where one of them's poking the other in the eye, and then this other one is like trying to jump on the third one, and he keeps batting him away. And it's like, oh, good. This is all working now. It's all just like organically doing its own things based on what it finds interesting in the radiuses, and it's like, good. That's the behavior we were hoping to see.
What's the use case for this? Is this like a NPC background stuff or enemy plans type things or what?
It's more like think Tamagotchi type stuff or Pokemon, right? Like you're collecting these little things and you're collecting a bunch of them together and then placing them in your house, and so
Okay.
it's their sort of distance to each other will be relevant to how sort of they do stuff, and you have to kind of keep an eye and make sure they don't cause too much chaos, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and don't let them get access to the internet. That would be yeah. So I saw a video about a guy who created a computer within Terraria. I'll find the YouTube link real quick. I don't know how impressive this is. It sounds impressive. because I would know how to do that, and it's all within a with a thing. So let me just share the link for everyone.
Yeah, I always find these things interesting. So again, so you're not familiar with the general principles of how these work, right?
Nah.
Well, that's what's funny. It's like it's actually really, really straightforward, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of funny at a very, very basic level. You can do you can make anything a complicated computer if you really want to, because everything boils down to, it's a cliche, but it all boils down to zeros and ones.
Mm-hmm.
So what you do is anything you can represent in a binary state can be turned into a computer, roughly. So the general idea is if a game of any kind has something that can be on or off, you can then make logic gates, and logic gates are on off is true or false, but then you have what's called an OR gate, one or the other, but then not both of them, and then XOR gate, and then so on. So you end up, as long as you can build all the various gates, you can build logic tables. As long as you can build logic tables, you can then stack them together, and then you can build circuitry. And then once you can build circuitry, you can start building in behaviors, and then basically you can build what are called clocks, and then clocks are tickers that have intervals that do stuff. And by that stage, you've got all of the pieces required to build a basic computer. And so, while it is very impressive from a sheer work perspective, every game with a light switch can theoretically be, as they say, Turing complete from that perspective, because it is just like, if you're willing to put the patience in to feedback loop A to B to C into the systems, you can do it anything. You can do it in Minecraft, you can do it in Terraria and that kind of stuff. But it is a fun thought experiment. The most interesting one I've ever seen is somebody who remade Pokemon 1 in Minecraft. And I don't mean like some of the logic. I mean they literally rewrote the game code into the code blocks in the game, and then changed the textures to render the game, and made a fully playable giant, like X kilometer wide Game Boy with actual playable buttons in Terraria that ran the source code. Not ran a ROM and rendered a texture, but like ran the code on the blocks that are like flashing lights that represented your inventory of items, and you could actually play the game through, which was kind of insane. Now, it is somewhat cheating because in Minecraft, you're allowed to have code blocks, and so it wasn't just blocks using, it wasn't just the light switches on and off. They did actually have chunks of code in places, but it was distributed across all of these blocks. And so it's more fair to say in that example, they used Minecraft, redstone, and blocks as memory registers for a Game Boy, which is still really, really impressive, because it was like hundreds of thousands of lines of these ridiculous memory packets back and forth that represent a Game Boy game. But to think, yeah, but it's principally the same thing.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, well, don't let your plants start programming their own computers.
Yeah, we're not there yet. Although it is funny at the moment that we have like marketed things as being interesting and having extremities. So if you place it near the computer and you're trying to do stuff, it will turn off the computer on you. So just to spite you. So there's a lot of these little things that are kind of fun. And there's like a galaxy map for like traveling to different places. And again, if you're not careful, it'll like tap the map and pick a location for you that you're not paying attention. So just these little things are kind of fun. But yeah, it's not quite ready to start typing up its own essays, you know.
Not yet. Soon enough. That's interesting. I think that's a cool idea. The even just I mean, I guess until now, the most exciting background sort of sentience would be like some sort of animation, procedural animation that lets things touch a wall, or lets things like kind of react to some collider in the world that, you know, isn't always there. But this means, you know, with a little logic, NPCs can be much more dynamic and just do things that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, we're kind of skirting the line. Like, we don't want to rate. Like, yeah, you could go to make this really proper AI and do interesting stuff. You'd want to minimum use utility AI, or move up to GOP or something. But we're not. It's not even that fancy, because they are representing like little creatures. Like they're just meant to be internal states, but they do have a sensor system that interacts with stuff. And so that was something we wanted to get right, so that every single creature basically has a sense of its surroundings. And then what it does is it finds everything nearby, and then it runs it through an assessment. And an assessment basically says, what's my affinity to this? Do I hate it? Do I like it? And how interesting is it presently? And it's just basically a couple of numbers. It's nothing too crazy. But then based on those, it weights everything. But there's also like modifiers to weights. So for example, you can query the object and say, do you do interesting things? So not only are you interesting to me personally, but do you do interesting things? If you do, check if it's doing something. So for example, if a plant dances, it would up its internal amount of interestingness by a little bit so that that'll modify the value. So you may not find that particular plant interesting, but it'll increase that value. And then secondly, from that, there's a second layer for memory. So the plants have a memory stack of, I've looked at this before, how do I feel about it? And if I've seen it before, and it hasn't done anything interesting in the last while, it starts to slowly degrade interest. And so that way, if it's staring at something and nothing's happening, it'll move on. So it's like there's these fun layers of systems where you're watching, and I've got little debug sliders, so you can like go into the plant's brains and see the different things, and it says, "Ooh, that's really interesting." It's like, "Oh, this did something cool," and you're watching the like interest go up and down on different stuff, and it's all just fundamentally like a number changing over time and different stacks of values to do it. But it's funny how after just 3 layers, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more organic feeling, because now it like looks over dramatically and then gets bored. Then this thing dances and it's like, what's that? Oh, never mind. Comes back and it's like it's already doing its own little behavior, and it's fun to see.
Well, it is interesting that we've talked about this before with just more traditional behavioral AI for NPCs and enemies. It doesn't take many parameters to make them appear like they are complex, when complex behavior is just a few simple things combined in seemingly random ways, and so it kind of mimics in a way even human behavior, I would say. I was talking the other night with a game dev group, and I was talking about how I was coding this, and I during a stream actually, and I was doing whatever. I was doing a new method, and I went to another class where I needed to connect the method or something together, and I said, "Oh, now I need to private this." And like as I was talking, wasn't typing, it just showed everything that I just said. And I was like, is this listening to me? It's not listening to me. But so we're so predictable because our behaviors, we feel that's pretty complex, but how complex is it really in the end? I think, we get hungry and we eat. That's what we do. And so if our hunger bar goes up, our chance of eating that cookie goes up as well. But we're all very good at not eating the cookie when we've just stuffed ourselves with pasta. So.
I will say though, that leads to one of my favorite topics in AI, which is a lot of people talk about the more dramatic stuff. They talk about like the pathfinding or the decision making. But in that sort of example of if hungry, eat food, or if scared, run away, I've mentioned this before, but I think one of the most underused but like fun modifiers for a lot of systems is what's called fuzzy logic. Because it's really, I wouldn't say it's simple. It's kind of like conceptually it's pretty simple, but it takes a bit of work to make. But it leads to a lot of really fun stuff, because it basically means in all of your systems, like you've written a few hundreds of these yourself at this stage. So at some point you have to make the decision that says, if health less than 30%, change your mind, do a different thing than you were going to do prior, or if ammo low, reload, or whatever it is that your thing does. You have to make that decision. But because you're writing the number in code, you're effectively setting a breakpoint of value. So it will do a thing until this point, and so reliably as a player you can watch it and go, it's running out of ammo, now it's going to reload, right? What fuzzy logic does is it fuzzifies the numbers. And so a good example of this, people always use the idea of height or age. So if you said someone is young or someone is old, there's not like in real life, the breakpoint isn't 33.5, but there's no like number. There's like a conceptual understanding of there's ranges of values, and there's some overlap in the center. And so there's like a degree of relation to that. So for example, someone who is between 0.1 and 2 feet tall is going to be small. Someone who's up in the 8, 9s, and 10s going to be really tall. And then in the middle you've got a nice gray area where what you can do is you could say someone is various levels, but they're degrees of radius. So you might say somebody who's 6 foot might be 0.1 tall, but like 0.9 normal sized, because they're kind of on the border of what you'd constitute that range. And so, long story short, you distill all of this down to all of your questions don't become if health is blank or if thing is blank. It becomes if, and you just say compare the two values. You say if hungry. What does hungry mean? Well, if hunger value in range hungry relative to my understanding of what that means. And then likewise, the other thing, so what this leads to is when you finally get to the complicated logic. So say you've got two creatures fighting each other, and one of them's hungry and he wants to eat food, but he's also afraid of the other enemy, and he can also check the strength of the enemy and check the strength of himself. So he might internally ask the question, if hungry enough, so if hunger has reached starving level and I'm strong and enemy looks weak, take the risk. Or if extra hungry, then do whatever. But because there's no hard-coded numbers in there, that particular creature might have a weaker affinity for how long it's willing to wait without eating, or it might have a more puffed up perspective of its own strength, or the other one, it might have a bad eyesight, so it miscalculates the strength of something else. And so the exact same line of code, if strong and enemy weak and hungry do this, suddenly leads to a variability that you yourself as a player can go, I don't know exactly how he's going to act, because if this value increases his hunger level by 0.2, he might move into or out of that range by just enough that he might flip a coin and go, you know what, I'm not taking the risk this time, I'm hungry enough, or I'm not hungry enough, you know. So fuzzy logic at the end of the day is just turning one number into two numbers, and then rather than comparing directly, you compare the overlap ranges. But that alone is, like you said, small amount of code for a really interesting set of now like modular behaviors, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine a simple thing I think I've done in the past is use just animation curves. So instead of having that point, just have a curve and like roll the dice, and somewhere on this curve it's going to be yes or no, but it's not going to be as complex as comparing a different thing entirely that could add some more interesting behavior, but it will be less predictable.
Curves are definitely a bit like, literally I added a curve just there today. We're talking about that like detection of interest. One thing that the designer said was, well, if I like shove something in your face, you're going to be a lot more interested in whatever that thing is. And it's like, so there should be a weighted amount of distance relative, but it's not, if it's not like linear. It's not like it's getting more and more interesting the closer I get. It's going to be, this is kind of interesting. Okay, this is dramatically interesting. And so I put a curve in so they could like dial that curve and go, when it's here, suddenly it's like, this is literally the most interesting thing in the world. But if it's even just a little bit out, it's like, okay, I don't care anymore. And then they can completely control that. And it's just exactly that. It's just a curve of how does it compare the two distance values, you know?
Yeah. Do these plants get annoyed? So if you go really close to where they're like, get over, it's too close. What are you doing?
The eyeball plant, you can poke it in the eye and it will actually like squint angrily at you. So yeah, there's stuff like that.
Perfect. That's good. If it can start hating the player, then that's a good way to get rid of toxic behavior in games. Make sure all the plants attack you if you're an ass. Neat. That's cool. All the AI stuff is just very interesting. Yeah, I imagine the future is going to be different once these systems become more commonplace, to where I guess to where the AI can write these systems for us, because a lot of developers, like myself included, oftentimes I wouldn't necessarily come up with that, or I could, but it would take a while to come up with on my own. So I'd either have to learn traditionally from a YouTube video or from a conference or a friend at work or something like that, or learn from the AI, which is something I've been doing a lot these days, where suddenly I'll ask you a question thinking I know the answer, and then it'll give me a different answer. I'm like, whoa, I didn't know you could do it that way. That's something new for me. So let me try that out. I was actually thinking the other day, I was thinking, well, first, two questions. One, am I becoming lazy or better? And it might be a little bit of both.
Yeah, it can be both. You can be more efficient, but then lazy at the same time. So I think it's both. Yeah.
I think it is, because I've come so with Copilot, I very much find myself starting to write the start of a debug log and letting it finish it for me, because usually it's right. And so it saves me 5 seconds of typing. And I have typos, so it saves me another 5 seconds of deleting what I typed to fix things.
Although, have you noticed, I've started doing this too. I bet you it's doing the same. It's faster 70% of the time, but you end up relying on it without realizing it, to the point that you start writing a word and going, come on. And you write another word and you go, come on. And you're like, okay, now I've spent more time waiting for this to finish the typing than if I just finished the sentence myself.
That's the lazy aspect. I'd rather spend more time having it do it for me, because it's less energy in my brain, I suppose. But even right before you hopped on, I realized this attack method was straight up incorrect code. So that was that was something. Let's see. Sovereign here asks, what do we do when AI can write us code so complex we can't solve it if it's correct? What do you do? I think.
That's actually, a lot of people don't realize that's what the real singularity is, right? Like people, So people are often confused. Like when they hear the term singularity, what does it mean? Well, they think, okay, you make an AI and it's smarter than people. It's like, no, that's not the singularity, because that's just a thing smarter than a person. Like we can get there someday, but that's whatever. The singularity is convergence, right? And what that means is computers aren't running in human time. If you want to make someone smarter, you have to sit them down and they have to learn a topic for 10 years. So, but a computer is running on clock speeds and whatever quantum computing it's going to be doing. So what the singularity really means is if we make a computer that can make itself even 1% smarter or faster, it can do that, but it can do it, it's only limited by the amount of processing power it has. So if it's now made its own processing power faster, the next one can do it in less time and even faster. And so what the singularity is that based on the fact that it's living a compressed time span relative to us, a lot of people predict that as soon as you turn the dial past it's good to pretty good, it's like releasing the chains. It's going to, like, it's not going to be a matter of like ChatGPT. People look at that and kind of go, it's similar, but we went from there was no chatbots to now there's like hundreds of them to now they're like trading on each other's homework to get faster and faster. It's like, sure, but it's still running at a like human pace. There's like human research and plumbing and whatever. The singularity is the moment when somebody makes something, and in the act of time you take to press the button, it runs an algorithm, improves itself, rewrites itself, is faster, does it again and again and again, and it could be literally in 25 seconds, it could have run the gamut of 500 iterations of itself because it's so fast, because it's produced to that point. So the idea of the singularity is that we'll hit a point where, before we even realize it, we'll have made something that just becomes intelligent, just like that split second, and in the next few seconds, we're already like staring down the barrel of something that's like Terminator level, because we have no control past that point. And you can't pause it because literally like once you've hit that curve, it's living in a different time stream than you are. It's like watching The Flash, where like to it, we're in slow motion and it just like speeds up past that. So yeah, that's the real answer is nothing. Once it can do that, we're kind of, there is nothing you can do.
I suppose all the thought experiments, the fearful thought experiments, have some form of, it does this so fast, we have the ability to turn it off, we can pull the plug, but it will have predicted that and somehow wants to stay alive. And that's a whole topic. Does it want to stay alive? That's a topic itself. Maybe we should just talk about.
Well, have you heard the basilisk argument?
That we should all be, is that the one, we should all be nicely AI now because it's going to be
Broca's basilisk? Exactly, yeah. And it's exactly that, right? It's that fear of, if you haven't heard that one, it's the idea that if a sentient AI does exist, and eventually, no matter when it does, it eventually happens. Theoretically, it's so smart it'll be able to like reverse engineer and look back at like what happened to make it happen. And realistically, if there are people who didn't contribute to it succeeding, it's going to go and probably kill those people. It's like, you actively tried to stop me from existing. And so the point is that just by knowing that that's a possible case, and an AI is not limited by human morality or time, if you don't actively help in making it happen, you are on the chopping block first to go. So it's sort of like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that you kind of have to help it, otherwise, you know, you're in trouble.
It's the opposite of making sure you don't put a climate change denier in charge of your Environment Protection Agency.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so Elon Musk recently came out. Elon Musk, lovely Elon Musk. Don't get me started there. I already started myself, but don't get started on that. But he came out with some new AI company because he's probably trying to make some money right now. And his new AI company is supposed to make a AI that likes humans, is curious about humans. I think curiosity was the word he used. With the idea being that an AI, a sentient AI who's much more advanced in 10 years or whatever, is not going to kill something it's very curious about. I don't know. Because the way I see it, I'm not convinced, it's not obvious, at least to me, that an AI system cares whether we live or die, or whether it lives or die. Like, why does an AI care once it's aware of itself? Why would it care if it dies? Is that something that's built into, like, we care if we die? Is that built into our awareness of ourselves, or is that built into our subconscious that desires to, you know, the same thing that we desire to eat when we're hungry, you know?
Well, I would say this comes down to a language problem, because a lot of people frame it as like will to live. It's not will to live. It is so there's a great AI researcher called Robert Miles. He's on the channel Computer File, and he describes this way better than I will, which is the idea of the alignment problem. So an AI isn't. It's not about whether an AI is like, oh, I want to live, don't kill me. What it is that you'll have given it some objective. Some objective might be something as simple as give me the most likely weather for tomorrow. And it seems like a very benign thing. But an AI, if it's smart enough, is going to go, well, if you shut me off, I can't give you the weather. It's not doing it out of any particular desire to live or any whatever else, but it objectively needs to be alive to continue the task you gave it. And so, from an alignment perspective, you think you gave it a banal thing, but what you've actually done is given it an intrinsic reason to live for the rest of reality until such time as weather doesn't exist. So, like, it's not. That's the real problem, is that it's not going to do things because of the human morality incentives that we think it will. It'll do things because of the side effects of the alignments that we give it for questions. So something as simple as do this thing might be, I guess I'll keep doing it until I either, like, if you basically say keep generating food, it'll keep generating food until literally nothing exists that can generate food. But you might do the opposite, where you might say solve murder, make sure there's no murders. And it's like, well, again, the cliche, well, if there's no people, there's no murder, so it kills everybody and problem solved, right? So that's obviously the hilarious extreme ones. But in a much simpler example, it's way more likely to be small things. It's going to be like maximize profits for this thing, and it's like, oh, well, then I'll lower the cost of this so that it makes all the cars brittle and they blow up. And it's like, oh no, but that kills people. It's like, oh, you want to maximize profits and not kill people? Okay, I'll do that. So I do this, and it's like, cool. So now it does it, and it's like you have to keep being refinement from it, because it doesn't. It's never going to gate itself based on morality. It's going to entirely do exactly what you ask it to do within the letter of the law, and that's the real problem, you know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I still wonder then, if we make an assumption that the AI in these scenarios would learn something new, essentially teach itself something new, as in, I better make sure they don't unplug me, otherwise I can't do my job. Wouldn't it perhaps also learn, why am I even doing this job in the first place? Or what's the real purpose of this job? Like, are they really saying what they think they're saying? And
well,
you know,
I don't think so. But again, I know where you're going, but this comes back to the human element. So we're getting into philosophy at this stage. But so principally speaking, there's this idea of axioms, which is like what drives us as a human being. Why do we do anything? And everyone has some axioms. They value something. They either value personal pride or being better at something, or they value family. There's some element of whatever. And you can split the entire world up in the two rough categories of statements. They're called is statements and ought statements, or, you know, shoulds, or the facts of the world. And so the facts of the world are things like it is raining, and a should is so you should wear a raincoat, or you should bring an umbrella. And that seems like it's logically flows and they sound the same, but there's a huge, huge difference, which is your value system, the thing that filters how you make decisions, is whether that's a good or bad thing. If you're in a game show where the person who gets the most water on them wins $10 million, suddenly your entire obvious assertion that A to B doesn't make sense anymore, because the value system has changed, even though the statement hasn't. Now, to your question, why doesn't it question the meaning of life? Well, because it's human beings that use the ought statements. We're the ones who put a therefore you should do this because it's morally righteous to do so. Computers don't have that portion. They only do, it is this and this is this, therefore if this, then do this. So the only way a computer would ever do that, would ever like question its own belief system, is if you give it an axiomatic thing that it will use to filter other decisions, so that it has ought statements, so that it makes belief system. So basically we're getting to the point where, like, you would literally have to make a computer have a desire to understand itself as a core axiom for it to question other axioms, to then get to that point of whatever else. And that is so far beyond the pale of that stuff that I don't see it happening. So I think broadly, as fun as things like Terminator are, computers are not really going to ever question their reality in the way we think about it. What they're much more likely to do is basically be computers that run incorrectly. That's much more likely to happen.
That run incorrectly, or that run exactly correctly, and we just made a mistake, I suppose.
Yeah, we phrased the question wrong, is the way I like to say it. It's just like, whoops, my mistake.
Yeah. Well, that it makes sense. I'm very well. In the end, we'll see what happens because I don't think that anyone's putting this genie back in the bottle at this point. It does make you wonder, though. Like with all this, the governments and secret companies out there, defense contractors, and other large corporations that just don't talk about what they're necessarily working on. ChatGPT 4 is pretty powerful. There's got to be more powerful systems out there already. How powerful do they go in the secrecies of the world, in the dark rooms around the world? And I assume I'm also making an assumption here, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm making an assumption that every generation is exponentially more capable of whatever. Fill in the blank.
Well, again, that's the other one where I would say probably not. I think we're hitting the. So when it comes to Moore's law, it was the classic, right? Computers were orders of magnitude better for years. Now that started to taper off. We're not quite done with it yet, but I mean, for the most part, it's no longer down to just keep making things faster. And the reason why is, well, physics kicks in. At some point, there is literally the smallest possible size you can make a thing that can still continue to perform the functions it needs to perform. Now, that's not the problem with something like ChatGPT, because again, you can just run more computers, more compute, more whatever. But that's not where the bottleneck of ChatGPT is. Like once you look at how these models work, you could have we're getting into like really nitty gritty stuff here, but the example that I found fascinating is I read a book called The Goal by Elijah Goldratt, and it talks about factory optimization. It's actually a really good book. It's written as a story, so it's really fun. Like, it's not written as a boring technical manual. It's like a funny it's about a guy who has to run a factory and manage his home life at the same time. But what it's doing is it's really teaching you some very interesting concepts around optimizing efficient systems. But the takeaway anyway for that book was they were trying to figure out, how do you make this factory faster? That's the general, like, it's a factory, we have to produce stuff, we're not making enough stuff fast enough, what's the deal? And a lot of your core assumptions kind of fall apart when you look at a system like this, because people think, well, we just need to run faster, more stuff, faster, let's go, let's get more stuff done. But what you realize when you really study these systems is your bottleneck is not your maximum throughput, it's the limiting factor. So you could have the 10 fastest runners in the world and one normal speed runner. But if your goal is to have them chain together to deliver something across country, no matter how fast everyone else is, your bottleneck will always be, at some point, it's handed to the slow person to kind of walk it across the line. Now, the ChatGPT metaphor, the reason I mentioned that is you could have 500 fast computers getting faster and faster, but the bottleneck is not the speed at running processing. The bottleneck has and always will be good quality information. Now, the first step was we didn't care about the quality information. We just ate the internet and went, there you go, there's a whole pile of stuff. And that gets you a very quick, from zero to seeming intelligence, because suddenly it can quote you entire medical journals. And so it's like fascinating. But it's also when you start to see the cracks and go, actually, hang on a second, it can't do basic maths. It's like it's failing at like the most fundamental, because it's not really doing maths. It's just like guessing the next sentences. Now, that's fine, but as these more systems are coming out, what people are doing is they're making it faster to get to the wrong answer. They're making it smaller, easier to compress, and can do faster stuff, but it's still doing the same thing, right? It's still, the real quality of work for these systems is they're hiring people to generate good test suites or to create and measure data to say, no, that's a bad answer, that's a good answer, and they're curating the quality of the questions coming through. So funnily enough, we're kind of reversed it now, where the problem isn't not enough processing power, it's actually not enough people to do not enough manual labor to give it the intelligence required to teach it, because you have to literally spend time to teach it to make the quality of the output. And the other way to look at it is we went from there was no chatbots to eating the internet. We don't have a second internet. We're not going to make more internets. What it did was eat all recorded history up to a certain point in time. That's not to say it won't get better, but like getting to ChatGPT 3 or 4, it was the game changer. That was the like we figured out we could reuse all of this information. But from this point forward, it's refinement of data quality. It's not going to have these exponential leaps and bounds in quality, because there isn't a big data set to eat again, and there isn't lots of high quality stuff to work on. So we're kind of hitting the point where it's really about quality and refinement. And so whoever can do that smarter, I think, is the real test,
So I suppose the real trick is to get an AI to do that to 99% level, or maybe 99% is not good enough. Maybe it's got to be like 99.99%. Because I guess when you come to percentages, 1% is a pretty large amount when you have millions. If 1% of all of our airplanes crashed, it'd be a problem.
True, but then again, it doesn't have to beat. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to beat humans. And right now, human error rate, like already, I think it's beating humans in. Like I think the estimation was like 78% or 80%, somewhere around that number would be like, I think the average human is like 67 or 60 or 68. So whatever the rate is they were using, and they're up to 80% already on ChatGPT. So on average, it is better than a person at solving most kinds of problems. It has hilarious glaring problems, like it misses entire obvious stuff. Yeah. But if you took the average person and assigned them all the world's average tasks, and you took the chatbot and did the same thing, it's already beating people. So I think it's kind of hard to, like, there's estimates that will get up as far as 95, maybe even 98. Like obviously getting to 100 is nearly impossible. But once you get to that stage, again, it's not even about the quality of the answers anymore. It's going to be that next. It's going to be the next bit, because the other part of it too. I think we talked about this on the show as well. A friend of Jason and mine, Chris Lucian, he said it really well once, and I just stuck with me. Is the one big problem, even if it's perfect, even if it's the best, most accurate thing in the world, is it is making the best average person. And you can have the world's best average human being, because by definition, it's averaging all the information that's out there. And so it's not going to create anything astronomical or amazing, because it's entirely going to pick the most likely and most average. Now you can throw in randomizers and seeds to modify that, but now it's not even making clever decisions. It's just doing the average, but occasionally you kick it a bit so it modifies. Like that's not quite the same thing. So trying to like use other AIs to modify that to make it more creative is probably where the more interesting technology is going.
I would imagine. Well, first you can ask it to talk to you like you are an expert in whatever field, and seemingly the answer is more complex at that point. Whether it's a better answer, I can't know because I'm not an expert in that field. But it is interesting when I think about things, generally, not enough perhaps, I sometimes think twice about things, right? We can do that. We can debate in our heads. And I'm sure there's a lot of debate going on before we even realize we have a thought, to get that thought into our consciousness. And I would imagine that an AI system that's capable of having that back and forth, of checking itself before it wrecks itself, being able to say, is this answer right? I want to say this, but let me just have a quick conversation in the background, and oh, you know what? There's a decent chance this answer isn't right. Let me think more on it, and come up with perhaps a better answer.
That's actually already true. So here's a fun fact a lot of people don't realize. You can already increase the quality of the answers you get from ChatGPT by like 15 or 20% by just writing a single line and saying something like, let's think step by step. It sounds like a silly thing, but if you write that when you ask it questions, what you're doing is you're forcing it to read a line, then describe the line, read a line, describe the line. And what it's doing is it's building up a corpus of information around the topic in question. So future questions become better answered. So just by asking it to read out its own responses, it's less likely to make a random leap from A to Z. It'll have to use the stuff it wrote itself down. And it's just like you're describing. It's like a person thinking out loud the steps. They're more likely to be able to reuse the previous information. And so this is already borne out. Like people have done tons of studies on this where they've looked at the numbers, and like it's not huge, but like you're getting between a 10 and 14% increase in the average quality of answers just by asking it, no matter whatever the question, to do it in a manner that forces it to engage with each step of its own statements.
Unfortunately, I asked it a question that lends itself to having step-by-step thing. What's a question that doesn't lend itself to step-by-steps?
Ask it. Why don't you ask it to come up with a question for you? There you go. Let's get meta.
What's that?
Ask it to give you a question. Yeah.
All right, that's good. So let's see. I need a question to ask an AI, which does not generally have a step-by-step answer. Let's see if it understands that. What are your thoughts? Oh my gosh, you ChatGPT are really. What are your thoughts on ethical implications of artificial intelligence in our society? Okay. And we will ask it that. So it's going to say stuff. But then it gives us
So-
step by step. What the hell?
Yeah.
It's not really step by step, though. But what you could do is ask it to break down things, I suppose, into smaller and smaller chunks. But
Yeah, because the way, again, if you know these things work, they start to color your way of engaging with them. Because if you remember, it's basically somebody writing an essay. Like it's a yes and story, right? It's like this happened and then this and then this. It's very much ad-libbing that sort of portion. And so whatever's written on this, it's like sharing a piece of paper and constantly writing down all of the thoughts everyone says. If you're trying to make a story and make it a cohesive story, the more facts you write down, the more you can stay aligned with the original goal. If you don't write things down, you're going to lose things by the wayside. And so all you're doing is the more you ask it to take notes and be more precise with its decision making, means every future question will have more of the previous stuff to build on that's directly relevant to the point. So it really is just more about like getting it to continually write more things that are accurate. And the more you can keep doing that, the more it'll remain kind of aligned to the problem.
so that requires it to have a longer memory as well. I've noticed.
Yeah.
My chats, I've got a whole lot of chats here where we talk about coding stuff, and at some point we'll start forgetting what we've talked about before. And I think there's some level of time that goes by too, where if I come back the next day, it's forgotten a lot more than the more recent stuff. I'm not sure. I'm just hypothesizing.
It's usually tokenized, right? So there's actually token calculators you can find online where you type in a sentence. Now a token isn't a character and a token isn't a word. It's basically down to how it's broken up. It's not quite syllables. It's hard to describe exactly, but you basically tokenize your words and it costs per tokens of stuff. And so it's I don't know how like detailed to get into the idea of vector databases here, but the general idea is it's not storing information as English. And it's not storing it as binary or bytes either. It's actually storing it as something weirdly different, which is it's storing it as, remember we said earlier about degrees of relation using fuzzy logic, where there's like, it's tall, whatever tall means. Like if you were to hand someone tall as a concept, like, and they tried to convert it to a number, like how do you do that? How do you convert the word tall like into like there's no number anymore? It's like, so it's representing the same principle, but it's doing it in a kind of an abstract way, right? Well, what it does is it stores words as vectors, literally vectors, in the same way we think about a vector in Unity, but it stores them as like n-dimensional vectors. So they're not x, y, and z. There's actually possibly like thousands of values in a vector, but that vector represents a point in space. And so it has all of these n-dimensional spaces of these concepts, and what it does is it like flies around and stitches these things together. So it's really weird. It's hard to describe what it's doing, but it's storing it as these tokenized things, and it kind of like builds stuff up in this network. And that's why people often use an example of like neurons, because it is a lot like neurons. It's like real points and like building, firing, synaptic, whatever. And it's funny that it genuinely is how it kind of works.
What I've found, this has nothing to do with fuzzy logic or the vectors and the relationship, but I found that I get better results if I constantly tell it, here's the updated script. Here's the updated script. Even if I didn't change anything that it gave me, I will just keep saying that just to reiterate the more recent stuff. And I think that also means when it starts forgetting the earlier stuff, because I think we're limited to 1 million tokens or whatever it is, it has more recent stuff that I've been working on.
I actually, funnily enough, I do that on purpose. So what I do is when it spit out a script that I kind of half like, I will actually copy the script, create a new chat, and like paste it in and say, do you know what this script does? And it will read it and go, yes, it does this, 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 and this. And now I know it's not going to mess up with half partial answers from previous conversations we had or go off script. I've now given it a new checkpoint to start from. And I can work from there and know that we're only talking about the code that's there, not the 4 iterations that they've worked on. So there's actually a point where I don't want it to drudge up like version 3 when we did a different thing. So sometimes I'll actually do that on purpose. I will like clear its memory, copy the script, and say, we're starting here. You never met me before. We're going to work on this script. That's just where we're going.
Yeah, I have noticed that if you don't do that from time to time, it will think about something that you're not working on anymore, but it's an old script, and it'll be like, oh, bring that into it. Well, no, don't do that. Yeah. I have to say though that this is the exciting part. Going back to the idea of, are we lazy or are we getting better, and the idea of, at some point it becomes very easy to kind of just ask it and go with it for a while, and you're going to get some bugs. So as long as you can get over the bugs, or have an AI that can get over the bugs sufficiently enough, it becomes very easy to code stuff, which is an interesting position. I think in my mind, I think it's very similar to Unity making games. It's much easier to make games than it was before, but you still need to code until visual scripting comes out, Playmaker comes out, Bolt comes out. Now, a lot of people can make games that couldn't make games before, because you don't need to learn. You need to learn something, but not quite as much. RPG Builder comes out. Now you can make an RPG. No code's necessarily required. You can if you want, but you don't have to. With this stuff, it enables people to almost code without coding, because they are coding, but they're not coding. But they are, but they aren't. And I wonder how that's going to affect. I think it's going to make things better in the end. There's not a fear-based hypothesis, but how that's going to affect things in the future, when more and more people are capable of doing the actual coding without needing a middle visual scripting or a middle tool to do it for them.
My hot take is, I don't think that's how this will pan out. I don't think that's how it's going to work. And I'm going to lean on some prior experience in a different field. I think I mentioned before, I used to work in something called business process management. Really sexy title for a job. I thought I was being hired to do C# and development for stuff. I was not. I was kind of bait and switch to my first sort of real big job. And what I was working on was, to go back to the idea of the tools, is somebody in business was like, we make lots of little internal applications. We're not talking the big corporate ones that hit out in the world. We're saying, like, sometimes we need this switch to turn on these intervals at this time, or that department needs to make sure that when they budget for a holiday, that enough money is assigned for this, or that person. These like little things that you don't want to waste your like expensive programmer's time all the time to make. But there's a lot of these things that happen. A common one being, I think I mentioned as well, there's some number database you have to legally check up against to make sure that this can happen. And so we need to check on an interval, do this. These are little mini apps. And so there's a concept called business process management, which is, that's a business process. We want to manage it. We don't want to have to write a big thing. So what part of that's unique? Well, it's not the UI, because conceptually, if you can take in a number and you can write a number to a screen and you can press a button, that covers 99.9% of applications. Type word, press button, whatever happens there, it does something else. And then connect to a database, and now you've covered almost 98%, because now you can connect to data, get data back, show it in a list. So now you can like list all the people in the company, select one, click next, type amount, do something else. And so that's what this app did. It did all of the, like, you basically build the flow of saying, it goes here, sends to this person, they return yes or no, gets sent here, and then they're shown this screen. This screen gives them these buttons in this input box. They can pick one of these, click next. And so my job as a programmer was not to program, but to like stitch these principles together. Now, this gets to your point, is like, if we lived in that world where people could stitch together the things they need, well, then you don't need programmers. Now, here's the thing. If that was the case, why did they hire me, a programmer, to do this, and not somebody not a programmer? Well, because those things work until they don't. And the real problem is, not code, because it's really hard to explain unless people are really into programming. But it's funny, when people say, what is code? Well, code is a distillation of your requirements into a language computers can understand. And so what is a non-coding language? Well, it's a description of what you're trying to do in a way a computer can understand. And what is the best version of that? Well, it's the one that lets you be as descriptive as you need to be, but no more, no less. And we call that code. So code is the thing that is exactly what people need it to be, to explain a problem in a way that's just detailed enough but not too detailed to solve the problem. Assembly is too low level, but this is like the next level above that. If you go one level higher, you have to start making assumptions. And that next level higher is like the blocks. Add a number, subtract a number, send to the database, and that works probably for 67% of the time. But as soon as a single thing is out of place, where it doesn't connect to this thing or have that thing, unlike code, where you can write a new line or modify it, you're just done. Like, what do you do? Because there's the cap has been limited. You end up needing to hire somebody to solve that problem for you, or you give up. And to bring this all back around to ChatGPT and stuff, I've seen people like that I work with use this for jobs, and they'll get through 70% of the tasks that they've never done before themselves. So at a base level, they are twice as productive as they used to be. In other words, they're able to tackle twice as many problems that they wouldn't have even touched before. But when they reach that cap, they don't just reach a cap in a way where, like, if I reach the cap, I can go, well, I guess I have to spend 2 days researching this and figure out how to do this. When they reach the cap, it is broken now, and there is nothing they can do. And they don't even understand what is broken to ask the right questions to get the right answers. Because in order for it to really be fixed past this point, you actually have to know why it's failing. All they know is they press button, code spits out a 7. It's like, is 7 good? What is 7? How do I? It's telling me 7. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. There you go. Well, now it's giving me 9. It's like, and suddenly I can't even engage with the problem. So all of this is to say, every time in reality people have tried this, they've tried to take programmers out of the equation in some capacity. You end up reaching a cap where it works to a point. But the problem is, the only people who care enough to try and do that are people who rely on it. Like in a company, yes, you might save some money in the short term. So the cheap companies will happily cut out all of the programmers. But the ones who actually want to deliver don't want it to work until it doesn't and then hit a brick wall and then be screwed. So the ones who actually care know it is not worth the benefit/risk of that 60% at the start, because the difference is this will slowly crap out, this will work fantastically, and then instantly crap out and break your entire thing. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think, basically as a programmer, to me it makes me 20% better. And I think that's where it's going to stay. It'll help a lot of people get into programming. It'll make programming more exciting. There'll be a lot of fun side projects made. There'll be a lot of like random middle tier matching identical projects that come out of it. But that step that gets you from there to programmer, I don't think that really exists. I don't think you're going to be, I think anywhere outside of a medium-sized startup, nobody is going to have their job replaced by an AI, because they might have tools replaced. They might have like portions of jobs done, but if it's bespoke work, nobody's going to program with a chat API to replace people. I just don't see that happening. There might be tools made that will do some of the work, but again, that's a subtle distinction.
Yeah, and I would think that in those scenarios, a successful use of AI to increase the productivity won't mean you'll have less programmers. It means you'll have better outcomes, which necessitate more programmers, because now you have more business. You have more product lines, you have more updates to make because, oh shit, we're successful. So in a way, you could find that there are more jobs for programmers. And to your point, I think it does lower the bar of entry dramatically for coding. I remember when I was in high school, I've probably said this before, I was my dad started a web development company, and in the Bay Area. It was a very big early thing. And yours truly was the very first person who ever coded the Cirque du Soleil website. And the first...
I remember you said websites. You mentioned that was your claim to fame.
The first professional sports league or team website was the Bumblebees, some arena football league thing. And I think Wired Magazine, if I'm not mistaken, I made their first website as well. You'll never know. I was a 15-year-old kid being paid under the table illegally by my dad. So, you know, they needed cheap labor. And so they taught us how to do basic HTML, which was very simple. It's not complicated stuff. And then shortly thereafter, my senior year of high school, I would go up to a company every Monday that my dad had worked with. He had done some project with, and they agreed to hire me for 3 hours, getting paid $20 an hour. At the time was good money for 1998, I guess, or 97. And I hated it because they had me doing the boring work. They had me doing the HTML stuff that was just mind numbing. I would go there. I was already tired from school, and I just like take trips to the hot chocolate bar and just hot chocolate because I was falling asleep. So I quit. Now that was probably a mistake because I was straight up like early tech. So I could have like gotten no college and just been in tech and been a billionaire by now. But so that was a mistake, but it was very boring because coding is often not fun. It can be very dry unless you get that bug of like problem solving and the logic of like the puzzle aspect. It's very hard to get into. My oldest brother, he got into it. He's got his PhD in it. He's like Google now, manager of other developers and all this stuff. So he got into it. I did not. I was curious about it, but I didn't get into it. But I think with this stuff, if I had this early, if I had Unity and ChatGPT in 1997, I would have been making games then because I wanted to make games then. That's what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to do the work to actually go out and make the games. And of course, in '97, I don't even know how you would start. I remember copying code from a magazine on my Apple IIgs. I'd type it in diligently, and then I'd press the run, and there was a bug, and I just copied it wrong, I guess, somewhere. I had no idea where because I didn't know what was going on. And at the time, I also didn't know how to save it to a disk. So, oops.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. Like I said, I probably very similar stories. Only for me, it was an app called ZQuest and very similar kind of learning how to do your first game type projects. But I also noticed, and again, I'm not sure how this will play out because one of the most disappointing things for me to realize when I was younger is you look back at games, right? And I remember the amount of games I got as a kid was very small. I think during the entire duration of my like up to the age of 16, I probably got like 12 games. In my like entire life, you get one for Christmas and you might get one middle of the year for some event or for birthday or something. And oftentimes you kind of suck at them and you're like, as a kid, you're like, I can't get past this level or something. And it might frustrate you, and so you throw it in the cupboard and you'll come back to it like months later and go, well, I'm out of other things to do. Let's try again, right? And you're thinking, okay, well, maybe that's just the games are bad or the quality or whatever. But, you know, they're some of the more sustaining memories because I put a lot of effort in and eventually got over the humps of what it is and kind of learned the processes. But I remember at one stage for my cousins, I got them a Christmas present where I got them an R4 card for the Game Boy, which is basically one of those like, you know, you can put 1,000 games on a single Game Boy card, and it's like there you go. So I remember for Christmas they opened the present from one of their family members, and they got like a game, and I said, "Cool, there's that one and all of the others." And you know, and I remember watching them play it, and they were like, they would open a game and play it for 10 minutes, and then move on to the next one, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's fine. Like that's how you can play around." But then I did it myself. Like I have tons of ROMs and games behind me and stuff, but that access to all of these things suddenly just makes like your expectations are higher because they're like, oh, I have so many choices. Why would I ever settle for something that's not amazing? And then when I am playing something, it's you get bored quickly because you've got so many options. You can always move on if you get bored. So what worries me about this stuff is there actually kind of was a strength to programming being hard. Like when I was younger, it was not something that had any cachet. Nobody thought they were going to get rich doing it. It wasn't fun to do. It was the only people interested were fellow nerds. You had to go and hunt down the communities to find these people to talk to them. And when you did something, as small as it would be amazing because literally no one else you knew for 1,000 miles could even turn on a VCR, let alone program a dot moving across a screen. But when we get to the stage that everyone can type in a sentence and press go and get something, the democratization of that, sure, everyone can do it, but now the social value of that has dropped immensely, and the interest in maintaining it has dropped immensely. And if the average is like what's the unique part now? It's not going to be in making the art because you can generate 3D models. It's not going to be in coming up with a story because you can ask the AI to write the story. It's not going to like where's the part where it's the human element of like what was the bit you put into it that made it yours? And this isn't from some philosophical good or bad or arts whatever. I purely mean you personally. What's your motivating factor to like make the thing? It used to be because no one else can do it. Literally, this is a thing that I can take the time to learn. I can make something no one else can do, or I have a unique interest that no one else around me does. And there's like there's an interest or there's a power in this going, yeah, I am going to go and learn this obscure thing because it's fun. But when it's easy, free, and popular, suddenly it's like, well, then why do I care? Everyone can do it. Like literally anybody, if they have 3 weeks, can now go and learn how to make a video game. So it might democratize it at the start, but I think there's a very strong risk it'll actually sort of kill a lot of enthusiasm for making it because you'll end up with the Android store mentality of like, it's just going to be a sea of crap that I think people just won't even want to make them. Like, there's a lot of people you ask if they want to make games and you tell them to make Snake, and their first instinct is, yuck, I don't want to make mobile games. That's where all the trash goes. And it's like, no, but that's where everyone learned. Now you feel above it because you associate it with crap. But like, literally, I was playing Balloon Tower Defense yesterday. A flash game because it's still fun because I enjoy those little flash games, but people now expect to make an MMO on their first go because they see people pressing buttons doing that, and I think when that doesn't happen, it'll kill their enthusiasm and they'll instantly go, games aren't for me. When like you might have stuck it out, put it in the cupboard, come back to it 2 months later, and like maybe pushed through if it was harder and less popular. But now, I think people will give up more.
Well, I definitely put Unity in the cupboard for 6 months when I first learned it. I think I've told that story before too. started learning it. There was a bug in the book I bought, so I was like, "Fuck this." So I put it away, and then 6 months later, I picked it up again, and I was like, "All right, let me figure this out." Found a different tutorial, and it worked that time. But
And I did the same thing, by the way. I did the same
Yeah.
thing. I started Unity. I couldn't get my head around it. I put it away, and I came back. I think it was for me. It was like 2 months, but it's principally the same thing. It's like this thing is difficult. I hate it. I expected this to be fun, and it isn't fun immediately. I'm done. But then I still wanted to do it, and I still had to go back and fight with the damn thing to eventually get where I wanted to go.
It doesn't help that a lot of the make this game really quick, make your MMO YouTube videos are spliced down to make it look like, oh no, it's simple. You just do this, and they ignore the fact that they spent 3 days working on that one script. They're like, just type this out. But they fixed all the bugs already. They've gotten all that, and they went over the stuff that like I already had this other stuff in and all that. So yeah, there's a lot there. I think I relayed the story as well on the show the other day. Maybe I didn't. I was telling this 10-year-old, he's now 11, about BattleBit, the low poly game that's blowing up, made by 4 people, Cinti assets and all that stuff, all blowing up. And I was like 200 and something whatever people played. So he's into Fortnite. So I was like, hey, have you heard about this game? Whenever I ask him if he's heard about this game, he hasn't, because he only plays Fortnite, right? So he never hears about it. I really want him to start playing other games, because there are more.
Although this one, he will hear about this one. This one is taking absolute world by storm. Like,
well,
I'm hearing about it, and I don't.
I told him to look it up on YouTube, and he looked at it, and he said, anyone can make this in Minecraft. And I was like, or in Roblox. I think anyone can make this in Roblox. I was like, not that. They're like, yeah, you just do it in Roblox. And now we know that you can't make that exact game in Roblox. You can make similar looking games in Roblox. They're not quite going to be the same. But to this 11-year-old who doesn't know much about anything in game dev, BattleBit, however, which game was it? Was BattleBit. Let me see if I can bring it up.
The TLDR for that game is, it looks like crap. It looks like a really shitty standard port game that you'd buy in the asset store. But the fundamental difference that a lot of people don't realize is it plays better than Call of Duty. It is legitimately, for everyone who's playing it, is saying that the animations are smooth, the combat is good. It's like it has at its core all of the features that are kind of been weeded out of modern versions of these games. And so it really shows that at a core level, if you make the game fun and compelling, it'll outpace all of the other stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it comes down to, is the game fun. And I think that really is getting back to your earlier point. We're going to have a lot of crappy games. And in the end, it's going to be about how did you use all the various AIs, writing your story, doing your audio, doing your models, doing your textures, all that stuff. How did you use all these in order to make something fun versus in order to make something crap? Anyone can pick up a guitar and start playing music. Whether somebody else would call it music is very different. And it takes a lot of time and practice to make something that sounds good to most people. And I think it's going to take a lot of time and practice, just as it does today, to make a game that feels fun to most people, or at least to the people who are into that kind of.
So this is exactly it, right? This is to get into my favorite part of this whole topic. Is people know me as a programmer because that's the thing that pays the bills, and I've been doing for most of my life. It's probably legitimately the thing I've spent the most amount of actual time doing. But then people see me in games, and they logically go, well, you're in games, and programming's your thing, so you must want to program for games. Here's my secret hot take. I don't want to program for games at all, well, not even remotely. My interest in games is in all of the stuff you said. Is that what fascinates me about games as an industry is I really, really enjoy the intangibles that make two things that look identical, one be really good and one be really bad. And the short answer is, it's not magic. There is actual answers, but the answers tend to be complicated sets of rules that you have to understand to get to that point. Without going into all the individuals, we're talking about things like color theory and things like user experience design and motion design and feedback and juice and understanding game flow and all of the stuff that you're not going to be able to copy and paste from an asset store, the stuff that you have to understand how to stitch together. And that's the bit I really enjoy, because I find it's the stuff that is it's academically interesting. There's a lot to chew on with it, which is why I'm ready next time. I was going to give a big rant on game audio, because so many arguments with people about how do you do audio for games, and it's the whole thing. But yeah, so that, like, I look at that game and I see a lot of people talk about the graphics and stuff, but like, I could tell immediately just from looking at the reload animation. The reload animation in that game is really, really good. Like, deceptively too good for the game that you're looking at. It is very fast but fluid. It is like the animations work. It doesn't, for the sight line from where you're sitting doing angling. It's like the person who made that understands what that needs to do to facilitate that gameplay loop. How fast it needs to be, how in the way of your screen it needs to not be, cornering, and how you need to be able to control your character. And so it's not about the visuals at all. It's about the fact that, again, as someone who played Overwatch at a like middling to high level, I played to like just at the masters level, which, like, once you get to there, you have to understand whatever game you're playing to the point where you're at least like understanding the meta of the game that's working. And a lot of this stuff is like, a game can fail because of seemingly random small things. Like, they can literally fail because I think I've told this story before too, about how players misbalance weapons in a game which had identical stats because the fire sound on one gun on one team felt slightly louder and beefier, and so people had a presumption that that was a stronger weapon. And so even though they're both the starting pistol that had the exact same stats, people felt lacking confidence if they were on the wrong team, and they wouldn't buy the same pistol because they would feel it would be weaker and they'd lose, and that feeling made them act more cautious, which made them take less risks, which made them die more often. And so even though it's entirely player perception, statistically it bore out that even though they're the identical weapon in stats, if you were to measure the stats from all the games played across thousands of people across the world, they actually do, that gun performed worse because the sound effect was pitched slightly different. It's like, that's insane. Like, because we're not talking anymore about the details of numbers. We're talking about human behavior, which is changed by sound design. And so the sound design changed the balance of a multiplayer game, right? That's the level of ridiculous min-maxing this stuff gets to. So yeah, it's that stuff that's really fascinating. Like, how do you design sight lines and levels? Why is it that if I move this box from here to here, I've broken the game balance? Because that line of sight offers a cornering which has a 20% better angle for that person to hold that door, which means that angle can't be taken, which means that height. Like, suddenly everything like falls apart. So yeah, from game design perspectives, that's the bit that I find interesting because it's the hardest to like quantify and explain, but it's also the one with the most and there's no research either. Like, there's very few books on this stuff. You have to like watch all the GDC talks. You have to kind of see people's learnings on it. But yeah, so it's not programming.
One of those things that people just can get a sense for. Some people might have a more natural sense of it just by virtue of whatever it is that their upbringing or who knows what. But then you can probably learn that over time by just educating yourself and training yourself on it. But understanding that, don't move that right there because you have to think about all these other things. And I'm not necessarily thinking about, I'm just feeling that that's a bad move. And if I then think about it, I can explain a few things, but I'm just not going to move it because my experience tells me don't do that. So I'm not going to do it. And that's, I suppose, where the expertise comes in and why in the end, in any industry that uses AI, you're still going to have humans doing the good stuff. And really, games are going to get more complicated, I suppose. Because
very much.
Yeah. Once everyone can make an MMO, you're going to realize that the MMOs today are going to look like all the games from the 80s and 90s, and they're just going to be like not that good because it's going to be a situation where anyone can make any MMO today. It's just relatively easy. And so now you're going to have to figure out what is that special thing that is unique in the end. And unique generally means that nobody else can do, or at least nobody else has done yet. And then shortly thereafter, you'll have all the copycats. But while people figure it out.
And that's one of those things too, that like, there's always that fun dichotomy between the old guard and the new guard. The old guard looks at games like Roblox and go, ugh, look at these like silly kids games with their, whatever. And they say, back in my day, we had GoldenEye. That's a real game. But the thing is, if you're actually honest with yourself, if you study game design and like step back from your, personal nostalgia, objectively, old games were crap. Like really, really bad. Because a lot of the stuff in them was limiting factors. Like, that art style wasn't a chosen aesthetic style. It was the literal limit of polygon count of what you could do. That movement speed wasn't, oh, bunny hopping, that's a really clever thing. No, that's what happens when you incorrectly assign the X and Y axis to your calculations so that certain angles move faster. That is a bug, not a feature. Now, it becomes a thing that we organically move on and like and whatever. But people really don't appreciate that a lot of this stuff is refinement over time. Now, sometimes the refinement goes too far and you end up getting a world of carbon copy, boring, lifeless stuff, and you end up getting like, oh, we've refined animations so they're so smooth, so every single game now plays like Batman or something, or Assassin's Creed, where everything's a fight choreography, and it's like, well, now you lose that tightness of animation. So people go back and they go back a generation to interrupt animations which look less smooth but feel better because they understand that. And so it pivots and changes over time, sure, but a lot of people will glorify the past as being some bastion of like creativity when it's like, well, no, there was less rules to follow, and so people made up their own stuff. And if you throw enough crap at the wall, some of it's going to really surprise you by being better than everything else. But there'll be a lot of like misses, but you just won't see the misses because there's not as much of a spotlight on it. These days, there's so much stuff being made and so many people doing so many things that it has to reach a minimum bar of quality to even be considered, and then you have to do something extreme to get noticed up be on top of that. So to say that new games are worse is objectively false. Like there are new bad games, but every industry is trending better from like effort and skill put into it. So I agree with you on that side of it, but I definitely think it's going to end up being that, just like with the movie industry now and various different things getting to the point where bigger is not always better, and we're realizing, why are all these AAA blockbusters flopping when like small things are working? Like that new the diver game that everyone loves is like small and made with love and attention. Suddenly it's great, amazing. How did that work? Well, that's what's going to happen. People are going to eventually stop and go, hang on a second, we keep making our maps bigger, but they're not, the games aren't getting better anymore. And they're going to have to stop and learn, we've kind of stopped the iteration. We've stopped this like small cyclical improvement of stuff. And there's a reason why companies like Nintendo have a bar of expectation where people just assume Nintendo games are good. Like, it is a surprise if a Nintendo game isn't at least a 7. It's expected to be, because they're not guessing. They have a refined formula of how every decision is made, and it's just how they work. And we're at that point where most people think you can just throw stuff at the wall and see what happens with game engines, because game engines do all the hard work for you. It's, well, no, because the game design is the hard part. It's the like level design, the understanding, the scaling stuff. It's the like, what are the rules your game follows? So I think we're going to end up seeing a return to smaller, more detailed games, and that's good. But my hope is it's going to be for story. If there's one thing I could wish into the universe, it would be two things. In the next 10 years, people would spend more time on game story and more time on game audio, because I think those two areas are just like still secondary, but they have the capacity to be the most elevating part of the entire genre. Like, games are interactive stories, and the stories are still the kinds of stories they used to tell back in Shakespearean times. They're still your 3-act structures with the heroes and the villains. Why are we not telling interesting and complicated stories when we could be? And why is the audio still basically just scoring it like a live movie score? It's like, why are we not using more of the dynamism and stuff? Why is dynamic music still a surprise? It's like a rare feature. Every game should be aware of using that combination of stuff. So they're my two hopes for the future.
You know, I found, speaking of, let me see, I found a sound, what was it? Sound Stripe, maybe? One of those services. There's a lot of the services out there about royalty-free music and sound effects. And this one, oh yeah, I think it was this one. Yeah, let me share the screen here.
Is that the one that generates it in layers and you sort of build it up?
It has. I don't think it generates anything, but when I looked at their pricing, first of all, I noticed their pricing was quite affordable compared to some of the other ones. It's billed, $20 if you pay a year in advance, otherwise $30. But stems for all songs.
Yeah, I used Epidemic Sound for YouTube stuff, and they're the same. They're my personal favorite for it. But exactly, like, the stems is really important. It gives you a lot more to play with when you're working on it. Yeah.
And I mean, that itself, if the difference between this plan and that plan is the stems, it's worth $10 a month. It's worth the extra $15 if you just do 1 month.
But to go back to AI, actually, one thing that's really fun, a lot of people don't realize this. One of the coolest new features in Adobe Premiere is audio retiming. So what you can do, and it's so cool, you can take one of those tracks, drop it into your timeline, and that the song is like 2 minutes long, but your video sequence is 3 minutes long. But you want it to like crescendo and end at the right thing. It's like, what do? Do you cut the song and try to like hope it lines up and whatever? Well, you could like crossfade and repeat loop, it, all these like little things. But you can actually go in and just stretch the track. And what it does is it calculates the BPM, slices up the bars, and will use AI to find two bits that sound similar, cut the chunks, restructure the song, and actually make it longer. It'll do all of that for you. And so from your perspective, you're just going, yeah, a bit longer. But it actually does all of this calculation and actually turns a 2 minute song into a 3 minute song for you. So this is like an inbuilt feature in Premiere that like loads of people don't realize exists.
I didn't realize that exists. I tend to copy, paste, and then do a slice and just ignore the fact that it ends in a random time. So I guess.
And there's also another feature in there too, which is there's actually in the search sidebar. If you're using a tool like that one, I'm pretty sure that one does it as well, Soundstripe, but I do know Epidemic Sound does. They actually have native plugins in Premiere, so you can actually search for music in Premiere, see them, play them, drag it onto your timeline, and just continue working. You don't have to go anywhere or get anything. It just appears in your timeline, which is also cool.
Yeah, I think they have a built-in Premiere tool. Yeah, Premiere and Frame.io, whatever that is. And stuff. So yeah, that's neat. I wonder how we could use that in games, because we want a crescendo to happen when you beat the bad guy, and so I suppose there might be some ways to kind of predict when the player's about to beat the bad guy, and maybe I don't know if this would piss people off if they knew it was happening. Maybe slightly change the outcomes of various hits to ensure that, oh, it's going to happen in the next 20 seconds. The crescendo is now going to happen in 15 seconds. So let's make sure it happens in 15 seconds. And then that next sword swing just happens to be a little bit stronger or a little bit less strong in order to ensure a nice ending.
Well, games already do that, but they do it in like a less, like more subtle way. Like things like the everyone talks about the classic examples of bullets in games like BioShock. A bullet will never kill you first time round. If a bullet will always get you to that one health, so you'll always have a chance just as a recover, because that feeling of I did it, I survived at the last minute is way too cool to ever like not have the player have that chance to do it. And same with all the other stuff too. Like enemies will always miss the first shots when they shoot you from behind, so that you always get that first sense of what was that, turn around, because getting shot and killed without seeing it is not very satisfying, right? So I think doing it to the audio is just another evolution of the same principle. And some people really hate that, but to me, it's about the feeling of the experience. I'm more than happy to let the game fudge at the right times, like a good magic trick, providing it doesn't actively feel like it's like fighting me in the experience.
That's the key. That's the key. I think, growing up with Nintendo, the first one, and then Super Nintendo, I was very much into Metroid. Great game. The original is a great game. In Metroid, the original, if you go through the wrong door, you die. You could leave if you have enough health, because you realize, oh shit, I can't go in here, so I can leave real quick. But otherwise, you die. And then the Metroid came out for the Game Boy, and it kind of pissed off young me, because suddenly they had this computer NPC that would say, you do this while I go do this, and then you're given the next tiny chunk of the map. And then you get to the end of that, and the computer comes back and says, I discovered all this amazing stuff. Now you have a little bit more chunk of the map. I'm like, I understand it's now probably for many players a better experience because it's easier, it's more guided. But for me, it went too far. Now I see the trick. It was pretty obvious at that point, but I saw the trick that it's all planned ahead. Now I think modern games, they still do that, but maybe they're a little smarter about it. They're a little bit more, they're just a little smarter about it. But I still don't like when I play New World, the only MMO I actually play, and I don't play it very often anymore. But when I do, there are maps where they tell you the level, and every map. And Diablo 4 does the same thing. They tell you what the level you need to be at to be there. If you go in when you're a little below it, you can get through. It's gonna be more challenging. If you go with just a little above it, it's easy as hell. And it's like, wait a minute, this whole thing's planned out for me. Like my entire gameplay is planned out. It's now my job just to experience it, which I guess is fun. But once I feel like every single level is going to be perfectly balanced for where I am and my character is. There's nothing. I'm never going to go to a place and be like, oh shit, this is a challenge. Can I skip the? That doesn't really happen. A little bit.
Yeah, I'm internal spite. I'm exactly the same. Like two examples of that is that one of the very first things I did in Skyrim when I first played it is I turned around the corner and I saw a giant, and I'm like, oh, can I fight him? Now I'm literally just out of the spawn door. I get crap beat out of me and I lose. And so I'm like, okay, it's on, you and me. I'm not leaving till you die and I survive. Now I happy to cheese the game to do it. And so I noticed that he's standing by because he basically is like a herder guarding the other guys as sheep. But his AI is really simple. He's using an avmesh and he tries to walk to you. And when he walks, he stops and uses the bat or the hammer. So if you can move your position so that the distance doubles on the other direction, he'll go the long way around. So what I mean is, if there's a little ledge and you're standing here versus here, he will repath and calc the long way, not the short way, based on how it's structured. And so I would just hop over the wall and I'd get him to like keep cycling. So I could like get him to turn around, hit him a few times, jump over, he'd turn around, jump over. So obviously I'm not doing the way the game's intended. Yeah. But again, out of pure spite, the level is way too high because I really wanted it. Now I was really annoyed because after I did finally kill him, I got no more experience than you would have gotten for hitting a few creatures. I kind of thought I would get some big reward for having killed something big, but no, I got nothing for it. But yeah, and I do the same thing. I did the same thing in Borderlands. As soon as, because Borderlands has a little skull symbol. If somebody's too high level for you, you get a very clear they're too high. But when I did that, I'm like, well, it's on then. That's what we're going to do. And so I played through the Doll DLC, where every single enemy was skulls, and I was like out of ammo constantly. But like that's not the way the game's supposed to be played. But I remember thinking of my whole memories of the game, that cycle where I'm doing this road trip and I have to like run across the road to get that one bit of ammo to just pray that I hit the critical shot to kill him, that I could get his gun because I'm running out of ammo in my gun. It was a slog, but it was really fun and memorable. So I definitely relate.
Yeah. It's funny because those, in a way, that those are the things where you are discovering the play, your own play, right? And it's not the play that the developers intended. And for Skyrim or something, I suppose a lot of it may be designing the ability for the player to do that, to give them that flexibility, but still within guardrails. The thing that got me about Skyrim when I started playing it was that the bad guys get stronger as I got stronger, and I didn't like that.
They scale with you, they level scale, yeah.
So it's
now that's a tough one. Because the trade-off is that it doesn't have the thing you said earlier, which is if that happens, you can go anywhere. So at least the game is not laid out for you. So like there is a trade-off there. Personally, I prefer that. I prefer the game at least makes the whole game playable to me rather than feeling like, oh, you can't go to that half the map until the allotted time. So it is a trade-off, but I agree.
It is, yeah. I think like my solution with when I made the Barbarian back in the day was like, because I really liked it, going back to the games you played as a kid. My Magic 6, the game that I played as a kid, that's the one that got me the most. You start out with a field of goblins, and they're kind of hard to kill. It takes a while. If you're not careful, you could die in the first little bit. You're probably not going to, but you could if you're just reckless. But by, of course, a little bit into the game, they're quite easy, and you can just walk around shooting arrows, and they just die. Which is also, in a way, sometimes fun to just be
that is actually, that's my favorite actual feeling in a game. Like of everything in the game, there's this moment I try to describe, which is so hard to do, but it's only ever happened like 3 times in a game ever, where you enter a new area and it's actually scary. Like your brain is, all of these things, I don't know how to deal with it. I'm the weakest thing here. I'm constantly losing. And at some point, at some future stage, you'll find yourself walking through that same area and you'll forget that this used to be scary. And you'll stop and realize it feels like home. Like you'll one-handed kill half the enemies while like going to the shop to grab something. And you're like, oh wait, this is my house now. I like this place. And that moment when you realize that, of suddenly like my relationship to this existing space has changed, is like this game feels like home now. That moment is such a like unique, fun experience that, yeah, I love that.
To me, that transition has to be slow. It can't be fast. And that's what gets me about these things where it's like, oh, if you're level 58, don't come here. But if you're level 60, come here and you're going to be fine. If you're level 62, you can kill everything. It's like, what? That's such a small little bit. Why is it? It has to be slow to where, it's a challenge. It gets less of a challenge, and at some point you forget and you do realize, oh, it's easier now, but you don't really realize. And then all of a sudden you just go into town. So my solution was to say, okay, well, when I spawn an enemy, and I'm going to do this in Legend of the Stone Soupies, I like this idea. When you have this field of goblins, and they're going to respawn in whatever time period. That's up to your game. But they're going to respawn in maybe 6 months worth of the game time, and this time they're going to be a little bit stronger. Like instead of 40 goblins, there's going to be 30 goblins and 10 orcs, or 10 stronger goblins, or each goblin's going to have some extra armor on it. They're all going to be the goblins, but they're going to be slightly, and then every time that it respawns, it's going to be slightly hard. So it's still going to be easy enough to where you're not going to be like, every time I come back, they're so hard that it's like the first time. But they're going to become a little bit more challenging, so it's not completely stale, but you'll still have that feeling of, I'm pretty much dominating this. It's just every time it's slightly different. So there's a little bit more challenge, but it's not. It scales slower than you do, I suppose, is the way.
I think that's a good middle ground. I will say my solution is to go back to what I said earlier with the narrative. I think, like most things, the answer is actually a failure of storytelling, funnily enough. Even mechanically, it's a failure of storytelling. Because what you've described is this feeling of being an anime protagonist where you're weak at the start, you start fighting, you manage to get a few lucky kills, you get a bit of confidence, you kill a few more things, you start to go, right, I guess it's time to grind, you put in the effort, you feel like it's rewarded, you want to be beaten just enough times to keep you feeling like it's still a challenge, but you want to win just enough times to keep pushing you along. And so you're building this internal narrative of you montaging yourself to the point that you return back to the starting village and you feel like a hero. So what that really is a literal hero's journey. That's what you're building. So the question is, how do you mechanically build an actual hero's journey someone experiences? And the reason why, in my opinion, most of these things fail is because their answer is to mechanically lay it bare. It is to have a number of spawning things, and those things change over time. But a hero's journey is two parts. It is the hero, and it is the journey. The journey is the part that people leave out. My solution would be, if you start at an area and you fight green goblins, and again, you have that start of they're hard to beat at first, but you kill a few of them, they get pretty good. And you work through the level, and then you go on a mission that sends you off to go do something. And then you fight some yellow ones, and they're slightly stronger, but to you, they're roughly the same level, because as you level up, the color changes to match the level that you're going. And then you go collect something, but the thing you were looking for isn't there, so you have to get on a boat to go on this big misadventure, and you come back. And you go through this whole thing, and then you end up in a cave, and whatever it goes. And then you eventually pop out the door, and you find yourself back in the starting village again. And now, by this stage, you've fought red, green, blue, and black goblins all the way down the thing. And so your expectation is how hard a goblin is at a certain level. So when I pop you back into the starting area again, when you open up a door, you're met with 40 goblins. But they're the green goblins you met at the start, and you suddenly, like, one-swipe them. You get that feeling because you did level up. And now you're getting a mental measure of, hang on a second, I remember this place. I struggled with 10 here when I first got here. Now I'm fighting 40 of them in the same place. So you still get your rise, but when you get back, you get that feeling because now the balance has shifted. So again, to me, that's a narrative structure. That is like, you need to give someone a structure where the challenge is always rising to meet them so that their baseline increases. So by the time you bring them back to the start area, all that's really changed is their baseline has increased, but the enemies are the same as they always were. And so the problem is when you have the enemies scaling with you, you end up getting to those weird scenarios you mentioned earlier. But I think the reason why that's a problem is because you can see it. In most games, you're playing an MMO, and there's the town, the shop, the spawn place, and the enemies, and you're walking back and forth across the same things. So you're never seeing, you're never giving yourself enough time to forget how hard they were to come back to fight them again, because you're just like, they'll already be easy by the third or fourth walkthrough. But if you have to go on a giant misadventure, and like for me that was Breath of the Wild, the Lionels. First time you see a Lionel, it's like one guy in a field, and he's like, well, that thing is just death incarnate. Like, if I even look at the thing, it's going to kill me. Like, I remember climbing up a tree, feeling like a genius, going to fire down on one, going, "Hi, you can't get me up here," and he lightning bolts me out of the tree, and I'm like, oh. So this is well beyond my capabilities. But then, even just a little bit down the game later, you're like backflipping over them, killing multiple ones at once, and you're like, oh, this is fine. Yeah. So to me, it's that. It's the idea that the only reason that works is I have to go on a journey. I need to see it. I need to get my ass handed to me, but then I need to move on. And that's the bit that most games fail at. You need to literally block the gate and send the player in the other direction. You need to, and that's, games like Dark Souls know this intrinsically. They give you a creature that you're supposed to die to, and they send you on a journey, which is like, you've got your ass beaten, and now you have to go back to the start and work your way up. So everyone does this. At some point, you feel cocky enough to go all the way back to that first guy, kill that first boss, and go, yeah, suck it, because they want you to have that feeling, and they know you will, but they have to do it in a way by showing you the full narrative cycle. And so I think too many games, it's leveling with you where the point is you're always on the knife edge of being just slightly better, or it's like the environment never changes. It's the story portion of the mechanics that's actually the failure. Like, you didn't have the journey to feel like you've arrived back having changed for it, you know?
This is what I love about these games, is that it gives you the freedom to choose which direction to go to as well. That gives you, honestly, like for those who haven't played Might and Magic 6, I think the design of the game is quite good for this type of thing, because it starts you in this one place. You can leave right away and go to a place that's slightly more challenging. If you go the wrong direction, you'll die, but you've got some freedom and you can get to the next town just fine. But it gives you this choice of like doing these things. And then in this first town, there are 2 quests, both of them relatively easy compared to the rest of the quests in the game, but they're both equally challenging in their own way. So you can choose, do I go in the cave and rescue the kid and kill the spider thing, or do I go the goblin thing and do the goblin thing, or go back and forth between the 2? Because the reality, maybe it is better to go back and forth. Or do I go over to this other town, try to do some stuff there that's too challenging, come back? So that gives you that choice. And that's just the first 2 little areas. There's 16 areas in the whole game. This is a 90s game, so 16 maps of all the exact same size. But when you come back to an area, sometimes in later in the game, not in the first, actually, yeah, there's areas in the first map that you can't get to because they're over water. You can see them from the shoreline, but until you're able to fly, which there's a secret fly spell in the first town, so if you know where that secret is, you can fly. You can get to the harder areas, and there's a dungeon over there that's way overpowered for the first level, and even the bad guys on those islands are stronger, and there's traps and stuff. So it gives you that, you come back, you defeat all those things. Oh, and by the way, I now have this walk on water spell. Let me just go over here. And now in this first town, which is all the basic everything, you've got brand new experience that you can now choose to do. You don't have to. None of this is required. I mean, sometimes, but with all the side quests, but you can do it. And now it gets me to the other thing, is the grind doesn't exist in this game, because there's so much things you can do that you organically get to a higher level as you do these things. So you don't have to say, well, to get this quest, I need to rise 5 levels. So let me just go kill this, kill that, kill this, kill that until I'm finally there. You just say, well, I'm going to go do a different thing, explore this whole other world. And by the time you're done with that, you just happen to be strong enough for the next thing.
Well, and then that goes back to my complaint with this, is that I think that the problem is, to go back to narrative, right? Because the problem that I have is, if the story is good enough to drive you forward, you will organically keep playing, to keep leveling, to like have, as you said, that thing of never having to stop and grind. And I think if there hits a brick wall that you have to grind for, it feels like it should be earned, like a challenge. The example that comes to my mind is in Fable. Fable, the first one, was really good at a couple of these narrative beats. Now, it was a little bit cliched in terms of most games from the 90s had a very clear right and wrong Paragon kind of thing, where it was very clear what the good and right thing to do was. Yeah. It's always more fun when it's like more kind of opaque, or more kind of gray to what you're doing. But one of the examples that comes to mind is something like you're tasked with saving this like old woman is going, oh, please help me, my grandson is got lost in the caves or whatever. And so you go into the caves to go help the grandson, and you find out that the grandmother actually sent the kid in to be sacrificed, and that you're now sent in as a second sacrifice. And so you now have the option of like going back with the kid, or letting the kid get sacrificed to save your own life, or like taking the really big fight to save the kid and then going back. And you can even then just let the kid go, or you can go back and then kill the old one. So you've got like, there's a level of like you choosing your own branching to that. But it's kind of like, the point is that the difficulty is tied to your moral decision. So to save the kid requires you to take on the hard fight, requiring you to take the bigger battle. Now, you get more rewards for it, and it's worth doing in general. But I think it should be that way, where like, if you do hit a brick wall because enemies are too hard, it should be because the thing at the other side of the enemies is so compelling narratively that like you're willing to go through that particular thing to get it, right? And a lot of games screw that up the other way, where they give you these great ways to get around stuff, like the smart solution of, oh, if you do this thing, you can actually skip the whole level. It's like, cool. So my reward for being extra good at the game is less game, right? As opposed to being extra good at the game gives me more game, right? That should be how that works.
Yeah. Those are concepts that I definitely want to put into my own project, where every a class level up quest, to turn from a knight to a champion or whatever, is based on, there's going to be this concept of good and evil, which aren't really good nor evil in both cases, but they call them that just for simplicity, black and white's sake. But in order to become the champion versus the dark knight, it's the same quest, but it determines what you do about the quest determines what the outcome is. And there's going to be the two options of, oh, damsel in distress, rescue her, bring her back. You're the champion. Go to her, realize that she escaped on her own because she hates it there, and help her get someplace else. And you're now the Dark Knight. Or the third option, do nothing, realize what's happening, but then step back and say, I'm not getting into this, and do nothing. And you don't get to the advancement. But the secret of the game is that to get the really good ending, you have to do that for every character. So you don't take a side. That's how you get the really good ending. You'll always get an ending, but that way you can also play it through. So if you're good at the game, next time you play it, there's going to be more game. There's going to be more dungeons. There's going to be more things to explore. And maybe even, don't quote me on it, but maybe even the game will remember your past gameplays. And if you did certain things in the past, suddenly something might be slightly different for you. And you might be like, wait a minute, wasn't this way before? And it will tie into this much larger story that will be revealed through multiple playthroughs as you realize that there's more going on than meets the eye. Transformers. It's not a Transformers game. Yeah. So, but this is, by the way, this is the Might and Magic 6 for all you folks out there. It looks really, this is the gameplay. It's very simple.
You might have better luck showing RuneScape. I think that's the generation that's probably watching most, right?
RuneScape? I don't think I ever played that.
I didn't play much of it, but it was the game that like completely swarmed the majority of my entire like age group. It was the most popular. I guess it's been so long. I think it was one of the mini games that had a revival at some stage.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Basically, it was like a small, almost browser-like version of the same kinds of Might and Magic type stuff, right? It was your classic MMO with all of the farming and shopping, and yeah, it has a very RuneScape vibe to this.
Yeah. What's
it was just a lot less RPG.
Okay. I love how all of the enemies are just sprites. They're flat sprites, and they just, as you move, they'll rotate towards you and everything. That was the technology of the day. Even these barrels, like as you see, as you move, they rotate towards you. But they do a pretty good job of making them feel 3D in an early 3D world. But in the end, I think this shines because of the gameplay and the game mechanics rather than the graphics. The graphics, of course, very, very dated. So, but that's the one that when I was a kid, got myself a PC just to play that game because I was a Mac user. Might and Magic, by the way, always came out on the Mac until number 5. This was the first. Number 6 was the first one that didn't come out on the Mac, and they always looked better on the Mac too because they would come out later, so the graphics would be a year or two more advanced. So they always looked phenomenal on the Mac compared to the PC. But this one didn't, and I remember I bought a PC just for it.
Well, hey, if the new Apple show is anything to go by, maybe gaming on an Apple device may not be a thing of the past for long. They might actually have some game support going forward.
I mean, it's an interesting. What's the right catch-22 chicken egg cart and horse type of thing, where they have good graphics on the Mac. They've always had strong graphics, not quite the same. Then there's been ups and downs for sure. But games all that were made for the Mac looked good or better than the PC, and so it seems like it's a little bit of a lot of people think there's no gaming on Mac, so they don't make games on Mac, and so there's no gaming on Mac, right? And I feel bad about that as a Mac user.
Well, I think secretly the answer is pretty clear as to why. I think that it's actually not. It's got nothing really to do with games per se. It's the fact that if you were to like distill the philosophy of Apple down to anything, it's unless we can do it better than everybody else, we're not going to do it.
Hmm.
That's just the general principle. If we can't make the best, the shiniest, the most, aesthetic version, we don't care. And the problem with games is inherently a messy industry. It is not a clear-cut answer. There's not one. You can't make the best game. Like there's nothing you can do to make the correct game. And in doing so, it will be a large amount of effort on their part. So I think as long as there's not a right answer, they're not super interested in it. The only reason they got into it now, or they're getting into this stuff, is because with a VR headset, they could make the best one, and they did. Now, is it the best selling one or the best? That's a whole different question. But they did exactly what they want to do, which is, there's such thing as VR headsets. Let's make the best one. And I think gaming has always been a thing where, as long as gaming was another field to play in, they were happy. But as soon as gaming took on this entire monolithic thing, where like there were objective winners and losers in the space, there were companies like Nintendo and Sony who were doing really good jobs in it. It's like, can we be the best at this? And they're like, no. Okay, so we'll pick something else. We can be the best at audio, and we can be the best at mobile phones, because hardware is complicated, but it's like definable as a problem. And as long as you have enough engineering minds behind it, you can do it. But making the best game is a bit too broad. So I just don't think Apple ever really wanted to compete in that space.
They're also beholden to other people. They can't control it, right? Because they're not making the games themselves. They could make iTunes, they could make Pages and all their other first party software, which they did probably because they had to, right? Because they had to make something that otherwise there would be nothing, right? Because unless somebody else does it. And so games are, Unity doesn't make their own games, right? So maybe it's a similar thing there. It's not easy to make a game. Fortnite, I think there's a lot of backstory as to why Fortnite became the way it is. And I think a lot of shenanigans going on and buying a company and putting their customers out of business and all this other stuff. So they got lucky in the end. I think you could say that, there's a fair amount of luck. So I would suppose that, Apple dominated with mobile games because they had people making games for it, because they had the biggest platform. They had the biggest platform for mobile devices, and so people made games for it. And they don't have the biggest platform for gamers on PC, because people don't buy Macs to play games, and people who buy Macs, maybe they're just less likely to play games in general, because clearly you would buy a PC if you wanted to play games. So it's a little bit of that, but yeah, if the Vision Pro becomes, it doesn't seem like it's being positioned for gamers, but I'm sure there will be some interesting games. But if there's a cheaper version in the future that becomes the dominant platform, then you're going to see all the VR games being made for the Vision Pro, essentially the Mac, and then that might change things a little bit. But
actually, my sneaky guess, here's my hot take, and don't quote me on this, but if I was to bet something that'll catch everyone off guard in the next 8 years, I think Apple are going to come out with something that looks like this. In the next 8 years, they're going to finally tackle the handheld gaming market, because with the advent of streaming gaming stuff like the Logitech Cloud and the way the technology is going, they've got really powerful chips in their computers, and a lot of offloading is happening remote and whatever else. Now, again, this is pure speculation. I've not heard anything. I've not seen anybody else talk about it. Just the way that company's philosophy goes, and the way this particular industry is booming right now for mobile. If you know who the company Ambernick is, you know that they went from producing a product like this once every 3 years to producing one every 4 months. They're like, and people like me will buy all of them because they're really interested in the hobby. I think it is an area where someone could objectively make the best one. And that seems like a very appealing idea to someone like Apple. What's the next thing? Handheld gaming. But not handheld gaming in like the Nintendo fun, approachable way. Handheld gaming in the AAA streaming off a computer. Because all they have to do then is make the most comfortable, fun, ergonomic device, and all of the processing power is not an on-device problem. They don't have to deal with the heat. They don't have to deal with the mechanical issues. I think they can make the most aesthetic PSP-esque thing, but the trick would be to make the most comfortable, fun, stylish gaming thing, but all of the actual processing and stuff is done as a remote connection thing. So again, pure speculation. I have a strong feeling that's where I would imagine they'd go.
I don't know, because the iPod Touch seems to be like that in a way. Not iPod, the iPod Touch, right? Just a screen, not a phone, literally, what are you going to do with it? Play games. It's a gaming device. And you could get add-on things that other people make. They never work that well for D-pads and whatnot. But that was their thing. But they don't do that anymore now because everyone has the phone. So you don't need the iPod Touch because everyone's just going to get the phone. So in a way, isn't the phone already that device? And why would they differentiate?
Well, as somebody with a Galaxy S22 Ultra, it isn't. Like, to me, this is actually more powerful kind of than this.
Yeah.
But I can play GameCube games on this out of the box. Like, I don't even know if it's on, is it? Like, yeah, this is on, right? It's just Android, but out of the box, this beautiful thing here, what I can do is I can just jump in and play. I don't know if you can even see that now. Come on, focus. N64, DS, PS2, PSP, and I can just jump in and just grab a game and start playing, and it just works instantly. And it's a really nice screen size. It's designed. It's comfortable. It's like, this is better than a Switch because it's like lighter. It doesn't have as much processing. It's just a very simple Android. It's just an Android phone, but with the buttons and stuff baked in. And so there's genuinely something to be said for having the ease factor. There's no weird Bluetooth controllers connected to it. There's no nonsense attached. This is just, and I can pick this up and I can play a large screen version at 4x the resolution of Game Boy games, or in my case, I'm playing Wind Waker on it at the moment, and it's so cool. Like, it's just so simple. But it's not premium. It's good, but it's not like a premium high-end product. And so there's a market there for somebody to make this, but with high-end equipment and material.
Well, if we're talking about Apple, then they also will require it to be something that somebody will buy a new one of every year or two. So
true. Yeah.
That's the other thing.
But I think people will, though. That's the point, right? Because this is such a nostalgia-based thing where people are getting into this. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to the next iPhone because this is I like this small little mini phone. This is the 12 mini, and they're not going to make these anymore, the small ones. But I also think, and maybe this is my age, my eyes are suddenly like, what's going on? So maybe I do need a bigger screen these days. But I'm going to be getting the new phone when it comes out, so I'm excited to see what that is. For now, I keep having to delete media because I'm running out of space, and I don't want to buy another phone right now. So
I have a blue one of those myself. I used to use it for walks because, Apple devices have the best sensors on the Apple Watch, and so if you want to sync the stuff, you have to sync with that. So yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, my favorite Apple device for walks and all that stuff was the iPod Shuffle. That thing was amazing. It's a tiny little thing, $50 or whatever it was. I ended up destroying 2 of them by forgetting they were in my pocket and washing them. So this was pre-waterproof days. But that was my favorite Apple device for quite a long time because it was just so simple and it just worked. It just played my music and that was it.
For me, that was the Nano. The Nano was just such a little like click button, simple work too.
Yep. Good stuff. Well, Jason, I'm going to call this a stream because I got to take this dog out to go to the bathroom. So
I will take this dog out to go to the bathroom too. After all, it's been sitting here for a while. So, but yeah, that was fun. It was a good conversation. We covered a surprisingly large amount of topics.
Yeah. And so thanks for everybody for joining in. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I believe Jason Storey's coffee page is in the bottom description if I did that correctly, as well as links to Infinity PBR. And I learned how to do this recently too, so you can do that,
nice.
And all that. I know I think I need to start using Restream for my streams, but then my biggest complaint, I said this at the beginning of the stream, you probably weren't there. My biggest complaint is now, in order to show both my my Unity and my Rider and my ChatGPT and all the windows, I have to share my entire screen, including all this junk over here, which means it doesn't fill up the resolution. It's harder to read. And I used to have this is where I could put my notes and stuff over here, and now I can't. So I need to figure out how to maybe run it through a different application where the other application only.
Yeah, maybe use OBS because obviously I'm OBS right now, right? Like I'm using OBS to show my camera. So if I did want to do call outs and stuff, I could do that. I can literally move. I think I mentioned I can switch from here to my desktop and stuff whenever I want to. It's low resolution, but it's a thing I can do. So I'm sure there's a way for you to do that where you can set it up where OBS is actually doing your screen swapping and lets you crop and handle stuff, and then your webcam becomes that, and then you upres that to the appropriate amount. So that might work.
Yeah, figure that out. I've got OBS. It's yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens in the future. But I think I like being able to bring people on like this. So this is fun. So thanks for joining, Jason, and have a great night, everybody. We'll see you later.